Rohan is my neighbor. I just met him this last year. We've had fun hanging out. We could talk for hours about all kinds of different things. Rohan is headed to India also with me in January to teach. Rohan is a software guru, serial entrepreneur. Is that accurate?
I guess.
You guessed? Okay. Rohan is a good example of entrepreneurial strength finder. Not strength finder, but entrepreneurial strength finder. There are 10 characteristics in here that came out of Gallup surveying 2,500 entrepreneurs. I won't read through the list to you, but these characteristics seem to be you, my friend.
Wow.
Right? So take a look sometime and tell me if that's accurate. He's the former founder and president of Metrics Software, and so we're delighted to have you come.
Thanks, John and Pat, for having me here, and it's an honour to be able to tell a bit of my story, and I'll try to be done by 8:29. I didn't mention, and I haven't planned to mention, but I've got 4 children, 10-year-old boy, 12-year-old boy, 19-year-old boy, and a 20-year-old daughter too, and been married for 24 years this week, which it's funny, I was looking, one of my surprise gifts for my wife for our anniversary, we haven't always done the anniversary thing, maybe flowers, but I got our wedding video, which is on the old magnetic DVD, transferred to a the magnetic VHS, transferred that to a DVD. It was late, unfortunately, because I forgot to mention it was in the Australian PAL format. And we haven't had a chance to watch it together yet. I've had a little sneak preview, and it amazed me to look at my 24-year-old self. So we've been married 24 years, and I was 24 when we got married. So half my life ago, and actually it ties into what I'm going to talk about a bit today, is that I'm a different person than I was, and parts of that I regret. The 24-year-old body was better than the 48-year-old body, but there's other things. There's lessons I've learned, things I've gone through and weathered and experienced that I am really grateful that I'm a different guy. My wedding speech was awkward. I kept on repeating "brilliant" when I was talking about the flowers or the bridesmaids. Brilliant, Anyway, it's what you do when you're nervous and 24, and a new husband. So I was pretty excited as well. Anyway, so I'm going to give some background. How do I push this forward? Okay, this guy. No. Oh yeah, this guy. Okay. So that's me. I made it to a cover of a magazine. Isn't that cool? If I've got time, I will tell you the story about how that happened, because it's a miracle, in my view. And it was 10 years ago, 2006. So, and we were making some waves in the industry. Sorry. So, click. Maybe the other one. There we go. I'm going to start with some history. So I joined the printing industry. I'm from Australia. If you hadn't noticed, I talk funny. In 1986, I just finished high school. I started going to college in Australia and thought, nah, this is not for me at the moment. I'm going to get some money. I'm going to learn to fly planes and have an exciting life. So I got into the printing industry. That is funny. And next thing you know, 20 years have gone past and I haven't ever flown. Although I have now. Since the last 2 years I've been flying a lot, making up for lost time. So I got into the printing industry in the 80s, which is an interesting time because this guy named Steve Jobs lived around up this neck of the woods, was changing technology and the industry. He ended up changing so many industries, didn't he, with music as well. But graphic arts was a big one. The Macintosh became the graphic arts PC. And technology was making its way down to Australia in the late 80s. And it was about 95 where I had something they call an entrepreneurial seizure, where, I could do this for myself. How hard can it be? So, famous last words. Next thing you know, 20 years like that. So in 95, about 95, 94, I came up with the idea of starting my own software business. And again, if I have time, I'll tell you the reasoning behind that. But I'm going to watch the time. So I started my own software business, not having, I'd done a Hello World on an Apple II in grade 7. So besides that, I really didn't know how to write software, but I just thought I could, so I did. It took a while. Although, back in those days, there was something called Visual Basic. Microsoft put out Visual Basic. And it was the programming language for dummies like myself. And in less than a year, I'd written my first program and started selling it for over $10,000 a pop, which was cool. It really was. And my parents-in-law they were just so relieved. My father-in-law was the go to work on the train every day, same job for 40-year type, anyway. So I somehow got their respect in the end. So that business, I did my very first trip to the US in 1999. In late June, early July, and I travelled around. There was this thing called the internet that had happened, and so when I'm starting software, there really wasn't much of an internet. There was CompuServe, there was a few things, and I was starting to connect with people. But then the internet and certain printing companies in America had websites, so I connected with them and made my first trip over here to try to sell my software to them. And I did sell one in Kentucky. And then I visited a Linwood-based company called ScenicSoft, and I had made my software work together with theirs, and I showed them that, and I left that day their establishment with an offer for my business. It wasn't a hard offer, but it was an interest. So that was July 99. By November 99, I had sold my business to them, and I'd moved my family, and I were only 2 kids at the time, to live in Linwood. That was my introduction to the US. Worked with them until 2002. We renamed the product up front, and then I went back to Australia to do it all again, having learned a lot. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons I learned. But I learned a lot here, and tried to put all that into a new product and into a new business, which I did. It was called Metrics, and it was much more successful than the first time around. A lot of fun, a lot of work, and as part of that, so I started that business in Australia in 2003. We started a US subsidiary in about, I'm going to say 2008, 2009, and then moved over here in 2011 as part of that US subsidiary. And then I sold that, the whole business, to a public company in 2013. So just over 3 years ago. Worked with that buyer, they called EFI. Worked with them until May last year. 18 months with a public company is time served, in my view. Being a startup guy, that was really hard. And I left money on the table to leave, but it was my money or my soul. And actually, that's one of the life choices we often have to make, isn't it? Money or soul. So that's my history. That's my product in the end. It's pretty boring if you're not from the printing industry. But one of the things it does, which is really helpful in today's world, is if you buy business cards today, you probably didn't walk into a printing factory and talk to the desk. You probably ordered it online. And somebody behind that is taking hundreds of orders and trying to put them on one press sheet so they can make the press ready once and run one job, because it's the press setup is all the expensive time. So you can see here we've got a whole bunch of different products on the one sheet. When I was back in the printing industry, we did that occasionally, but it was hard work. And it would take you an hour or two, and then somebody changed the quantity they want, and that would throw everything out. So Metrics did all that with the click of a button. And just when gang printing, because of the internet, people ordering over the internet, was the right time. So we ended up selling it across 25 countries. Through a distribution channel that I didn't even know existed when I first got into software for the printing industry, but that's one of the things I learned from the Americans. The Americans know how to sell product, and so I learned a lot there. That's Metrics. So I'm going to go through some history of lessons I've learned. One of the first things I learned was that a guy with no software training can write software if you have the right tool. Visual Basic was the right tool back in the early 90s, mid-90s. After selling to ScenicSoft, I learned, like I said, a lot of things. I learned about distribution channels, OEMing, I also learned about cross-platform software development. The Mac is just as big in the graphic arts, if not bigger than the PC. Visual Basic only worked on the PC. So Java gave me cross-platform. I also learned how to write software that could work for multiple languages. So you could, again, it's all about selling. And really, the lessons I've learned aren't necessarily that profound in themselves. What's probably more profound is how ignorant I was when I started. And I thought, if you write the right software product, then the world will be the path to your door. And, that's naive. It was a beautiful dream. You need to have a good product. But people and distribution channels and these sorts of things, having software that runs in their native language. In the end, Metrics was written, it would operate in English, Spanish, French, German, and a few other languages, Chinese, so a bunch. And it made a big difference to sales. Who would have thought? So Java helped us make that work. So I'm a big Java advocate. There's another Java. Design patterns. You can learn how to program actually complex stuff. So I look back at the program that I wrote when I was in the mid-90s, that first one. It's almost embarrassing to say, but when you finished a job, so what we did is those layout diagrams I showed you before, we didn't do any interconnection with that. We just produced a little layout diagram on a piece of paper. And you printed that out, and then it was gone. There was no database. There was no way of remembering, even though you did that job yesterday, you had to do it from scratch. I didn't know. And thankfully, in the mid-90s, my customers didn't know either. If you tried to sell a product like that today, because people know how to use software. But back then it was pretty novel. And so there are design patterns that help you do these technical challenges that people just expect now. There's even guides on how to run a project, a software project. And that's another thing I learned really was to do with teams, and I'll get to that. But also how to just plan a software project that can scale and grow, and you can learn that. Steve McConnell's actually a local guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's pretty brilliant. Okay. Then I also learned about my limitations. So I was a geek. I certainly learned to program, but I didn't know the business side of things. I didn't know people very well. And to my rescue came Mr. Peter Drucker, who and I've got a lot of his books. I chose this one because this is the daily Drucker, 365 days. I read him like the Bible. Every day I tried to read some Drucker because he got my head in a space that had never been in before and taught me things. You can learn about things from books that change your world and really did change mine. And so he taught me about people. He claimed, and it's been in my experience too, that the toughest things you'll do in business are not your technical challenges, your distribution channels, these things. It's people. It's and that affects everything. When you're talking to software engineers, when you're talking to distribution channel owners, or when you're talking to employees. It really comes down to people. And as I think I've said, people wasn't my first thought, and certainly wasn't my forte. Peter Drucker helped me understand where a business fits into society, how to develop people, and he also says that they're the toughest decisions you'll make. And I've made some bad decisions. Some of my best decisions were people. Some of the worst decisions I made were people. I was one employee that I had around from the early days, and the truth is I should have let him go years earlier than I did. But I let, in that case, I'm not sure what it was, but personal things get in the way and hindered the growth of the business, drove me insane regularly. And then the same on the opposite end, later in my company years, only 2 years before I sold the business, I hired another guy who I had worked with at ScenicSoft. And I knew he was good, but I didn't know how good. And then I hired him, and whoa, he just... So if I had hired him years ago and let the other guy go, and everything would have been different too. So that's an example of, if I have regrets, I should have listened to my gut or pushed through the emotional side of letting that guy go. I have had to fire a few other people over the years. With one exception, they're all for the best. And those employees or ex-employees agreed with that in hindsight. One person I'd hired to work from home, and he'd never worked from home before. And, you start to, it's hard with employees because they just don't phone you and tell you in the next meeting, you know what, I'm really failing you, you should do something about it. They never tell you that. Where's the honour? You have to sort of work it out the hard way, don't you? And that's a wrestling time. And I did let this guy go, and we'd worked together at Scenic-Soft. But working from home wasn't working for him. He'd never done it before. And more importantly, his wife had never had a stay-at-home, work-from-home husband before. And so, you're sitting there, you could do stuff, and he didn't know how to say. So it was bad for their marriage. It was, none of this came out until probably about a year after we'd let him go. And he said, thank you. So it was hard, but I needed to because I wasn't able to, make things work at home, and he was never going to say so because, the pay came in every week.
For an office out of the home.
Working from home has challenges. And anyway, I'll keep moving. So Peter Drucker saved my life in many ways. The Bible, it's something I made a habit of reading every day. I didn't perfectly execute on that, but and the book I mainly read was Proverbs, believe it or not, because again Peter Drucker gave me insight to wisdom about business and management and people. Proverbs is supposedly written by one of the wisest men who ever lived, and it's 31 chapters, which makes one a day most months, and you skip chapter 31, every second month, so that's fine too. And so much wisdom about people, and these are ageless concepts of integrity and character, things we're talking about this morning, and dealing with people, and all sorts of stuff that was written 3,000 years ago actually, but it hasn't changed. So technology's changed. He wasn't writing about Java. He wasn't writing about distributed, computing or distributed management. But he was writing about people and civilization and concepts that are absolutely as relevant today. So that was one of my other daily readings, was Proverbs, to try to get that wisdom in here. If you expose yourself to it enough, maybe it'll stick, sort of thing. This one, you can see it's been worn out a bit. Yeah, trying to, again, I had to solve people. So when I joined Scenic-Soft, I was this naive geek. I'd become this naive geek, and then I learned that there's so much more to success. And I needed people, I needed marketing, I needed business. Dale Carnegie's a classic for understanding some of that. One of the greatest things, as I'm leaving Scenic-Soft, planning to go home and back to Australia and compete with these people, one of their product managers who had done a degree here, so I've never done a degree, I've done a little bit of college, but not actually completed a degree. I was talking to them about high-tech marketing strategies, thinking it was, just an occasional thing that people thought about, not realising that people like Geoffrey Moore had written books on it and consulted with the Microsofts, the Oracles, and the, who knows, the Wangs of the world that don't exist now, and studied and written incredible stuff about that. And so this became my guiding light for so many things. I could talk about this guy for hours, so I won't talk about him too much more, because this gave me the strategies I needed. The first business was a moderate success. I sold it and made money on it, but really it was a prototype in a way. And it's funny, when I was competing with them later, I used to call it a prototype to my potential customers too, who were looking at that product as well. The product I sold, Scenic-Soft, ended up being owned by Kodak. And so when I went back to Australia, it was in the process of being sold to a Canadian company who then got bought by Kodak. So I ended up competing against a Kodak product. And I'm this no-name guy from Australia. So it was challenging. But the concepts in here helped me understand how to do that. And I did it. And basically they killed the product. After I think a year or two after we launched, they killed their product, which was very satisfying. Another guy, Clayton Christensen, who was Harvard Business College's head of business school, he wrote about the innovator's dilemma, and this is really where I got the strategy, this and the other book, for how to compete with the big guys. And the big guys, like well, you probably, if you've worked for a big company, you realise that there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of protect your own turf. There's not a lot of innovation. In fact, people get innovative about politics. That's where they innovate, about how to protect their little turf establishment. And customers aren't really that interested in that, really. They're interested in new innovative products that are going to save them time. So the innovator's dilemma is that the big companies can't innovate generally because their middle management structure means that they're just protecting their own, and they don't want to be too creative because they might just offend the boss above them or show him up or threaten him or whatever. It's all sorts of people issues in a big company. That's the little guy's trump card, is you can try to build a flat structure, you can try to avoid politics, and you can focus on what the customer needs or what he doesn't know he needs yet, but he's going to need, and you can really outpace them. And which is why small companies often get acquired, because the big guys recognise this too. But this guy, he made an art form of this. He looked at multiple industries, the earth-moving equipment industry, how they missed hydraulics because they were trying to solve their customers' problems, not knowing that the future customers were going to have other issues and there was other technologies to beat them. Brilliant stuff. And again, this gave me strategies that I could really outpace the big guys with a team. I think we were a dozen people at our biggest size. It was very satisfying. Innovator's dilemma, innovator's solution. So this is what big companies could do if they wanted to try to beat that. Thankfully, the ones I compete with don't do it. Then again, trying to strengthen all my weaknesses, negotiating was a big thing. I sold my first business for stock options, and in the late 90s. Remember what happened in 2000 and stuff like that. So thankfully I got a little bit of money and a steady job in healthcare, but the stock options were useless. They sounded good at the time, but I also learned that my negotiation was pretty poor. And if I was ever going to do this again, I wanted that to be better. And there's a book coming up, and this one here, and a few others that I really learnt a lot more about negotiating. So if I'd have just gone back to Australia and reproduced what I'd done before, I would have had a cool product and not much to show for it. I wouldn't be talking to you today. But I focused on the weaknesses and learnt a lot of things that I never wanted to know and became a different person. That's the essential lesson behind this whole journey for me, is that you are becoming a different person. It's actually inevitable, but you can be deliberate about it and strategic about it, or you can just let it happen. And often, people, the different person they become is bitter or angry or regretful. I challenge you, if you like, I encourage you to not go that path, to actually create stuff and to create a different you. And it's much more satisfying. Sell your business your way. So again, I wanted to understand how to sell my business. They take a long time to build, and everybody's dream is a good, respectable exit. Even if they say, I love my job. We all, thankfully, that if you can love your job, that's great. But who doesn't want a good exit, And again, by focusing on some of these things, how big companies value your company and stuff. I had to get inside their head of the public company that bought me, and ultimately I knew they were going to buy me. I mean, that was my conviction, that they need what I've got, and there's no way they can do it from the people I knew. But they're tough, and they were acquiring companies regularly, and they knew that they had teams. I was across boardroom tables with teams of people and lawyers, and I had my ring-ins, but it was this sort of thing that helped me understand what they were looking at and what they were looking for, and how I could preemptively build that and make something there. This was one of the best books, if not the best book on negotiation, getting to yes. Again, how to negotiate an agreement. The biggest thing from that is something called they call the BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So you need to be able to walk away. And if you can't walk away, they've got you. And that's the first company I sold to, ScenicSoft. They had me because I was worn out. I'd stretched my marriage to sort of breaking point by all these long hours, obsessed with technology, thinking technology was all it was about. And when they came along, it was a normal life in America, and I'll be home at 6 every night, darling. And I kept that promise, and save for marriage. But I learnt that if I couldn't go the distance, then I was going to be low-hanging fruit or easy pickings for somebody else. So I needed to build something sustainable financially, sustainable in the marriage. Relationship with my kids is important too. So focusing on those other areas of life, not just technology and the things that were naturally interesting to me, I put myself in a position where I could walk away. And so I turned down multiple offers over the years. I had one offer by the company that ended up buying me. In 2007, when I was still only one employee, we were at a trade show. They called me into a meeting and they said, "We'll give you $500,000 for your company." And it's my only, one guy. It was like, and I said, "No. $1 million." He doubled it on the spot. And I thought, this is going the right way. So now I said no. And I said, and he said, "Won't you even think about it?" I said, "I'll think about it." And he said, "Because that's my, that's the end of, that's all I'm authorised to do." But again, if I hadn't been thinking about the things that I had let me down in the past, I wouldn't have been in a position to do that. And what kept me going, even though $1 million, I look back and I think that would have been nice at that time. It was actually my passion for the business, my excitement over my vision, which they obviously saw too, that made me stay my ground and stand my ground, and actually ultimately, did better for me. Okay. So as I'm thinking of exiting, as I sold my business in 2013, and I'm working for this public company, and I'm not happy. I've still got stock in the company that vests every year. I've still got it's a pretty good position. I was director of metrics products, and we were integrating with all their other teams, and it was, in some ways, it's, it was good. I was comfortable. I was well paid, but I was too comfortable in a way. I was wrestling with it, and too comfortable financially, but not comfortable with my work. Instead of focusing on the customer and the product, it was all internal stuff. Again, everything I'd read about the big company pitfalls were in play. And one day I'm sitting down reading my email, and I got this newsletter from Canlis, the local restaurant, November 2004, I think it was. So who would have thought that some words would jump out of the page or the iPad? But Brian Canlis is talking about his passion for his restaurant and all that. And he made this quote: "If what we are doing is not aligned with who we want to become, it's time to do something different." And that just slapped me in the face that I'm not a public company guy. I'm a startup guy. I want to create, I want to innovate, I want to learn new things, I want to try new things. I want to create value for a customer. I don't want to, duck and weave the corridors of public company and their fiery darts. And so that actually spoke to me and determined the course of my life at that point. And I haven't regretted it for a minute. And it reminded me of, again, the proverbs that I've been reading every day. A good name is to be desired more. Desired is to be more desired than great wealth. Favour is better than silver and gold. Now, a good name, that's something that these days could just mean what people think of you. But I don't think that's what he was really talking about, because we know, you can manipulate the message. The political cycle here is it's big company politics on steroids. It's crazy. But a good name is really, it's your character. What we're talking about this morning. It's who you are, and creating who you are to be somebody who you respect, somebody who you actually like, who your children like, ideally. Although they can be fickle and influenced by popular culture too, so don't take that to heart. But that's what the Canlis message reminded me of. And I'm back to here. So if I've got 1 minute, I have got 1 minute. So during the startup phase of metrics, writing the software, I'm coding day and night. I've got one consultant, we're working really hard. And that's it, because when you've got no product, you've got no revenue, you've got no potential for revenue. It's a tough time. It's an exciting time though, because you've got a clean slate. I was working engineering round the clock, 6 days a week, and I was also praying every Monday. I was actually fasting every Monday because God was in this with me. And this one particular week, I hardly did any engineering at all because I felt that I needed to pray more. Unusual for me to pray more. My wife usually does that. But this particular week, at the end of the week, I actually felt pretty bad about myself. I hadn't created value. I hadn't, because you push yourself pretty hard. But I prayed a lot more and written almost no software. I got a call the following week from Print Action magazine in Canada. I'd never heard of them before. They wanted to. We'd sold one of our version 1 or 1.5 early versions to a company called Hasbro, the game maker, and they were talking to somebody. It turns out that they, by using metrics to make their game stuff to better, because they do their own printing, a lot of in-house, they were saving not millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but potentially millions if they scaled it up. They'd done a proper Six Sigma testing on it, so they had done this properly, a comparison of how they did things versus how they, and somehow it got back to Print Action. So they did a 10-page article on us on how Rohan Holt is changing the world of print. And I don't know to this day who that influenced, but I'm sure it influenced customers, competitors, potential buyers. So incredible value there that I couldn't have paid for. You can't buy a front cover. I don't know if you've tried to do that with an industry. Heidelberg and Fuji, they probably can, but companies like me couldn't. But I got that for nothing. And the lesson I took from that was that you got to take care of what you got to do, but God can do stuff that you can't possibly do. And that's one of the many lessons on that. Thank you.